is this story of the captivity, that they would be taken into captivity, and why, that coming back from the captivity, God was going to judge the nation, and he was going to cut off those horns, and he was going to rebuild Jerusalem. But we've got this picture of a Jerusalem that is not a physical Jerusalem, but the spiritual Jerusalem that God is going to build, and all of these glimpses of the coming Messiah through the person of Joshua and the concept of the branch, and it's been a really incredible experience to hear all that God has planned and how God is going to pull all of this together and redeem his people by making them a new people. And so you get to the end of chapter 6 and you're like, yes, that was awesome. And then you turn the page and you're like, what in the world is happening now? I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with the book of Zechariah. It just kind of starts over again with some of the difficult ideas and concepts, and that just makes it a lot more difficult. The other thing that makes it difficult is because we are such linear people, we love to study things from beginning to end. That's how we like to do it. And so we like what we're learning to be a story from beginning to end. And so when the Bible takes liberties with that and starts jumping all over the place, we struggle with that because we're like, no, we've already gone over this, so why are we talking about that again? And particularly with the book of Zechariah, what you're running into is if you try to force it to be linear, then you run into the difficulty of, well, this is talking about the end times, and this doesn't match what we know about the end times. And so you start struggling a little bit with what to do with these passages, what they're talking about, and it makes the whole thing frustrating to really study. And so when you go through the work of looking up in commentaries and articles and all these different opinions, there are a lot of opinions on what this section of Zechariah is talking about. And I go back to what I kind of started the class on Zechariah with, which was what my teacher Tommy Peeler told me, which was, I've now told you everything I know about this book, because I mean there's so much we don't know about this book, but all of that understood, let's kind of muddle through, and we'll see where we get to in the book of Zechariah. All right, so we're in chapter 7, Zechariah chapter 7. We're going to try to make it through the end of the book, which shouldn't be hard because I don't have that much to say about it. So we'll kind of go through these sections. We begin again with this concept of mourning and dealing with sin and what should be their attitude about sin. So we come to chapter 7, and somebody, if you will, read the first 3 verses. Chapter 7, 1, 2, and 3. All right, that's our comic relief for the evening, which I could not have read those names any better. That's why I love to make y'all read them. So we, what's the question being asked? What's the problem they're coming with? Okay, yeah. So. Yeah. Why would they have been mourning? Yeah, I mean they've had some sadness to deal with. Ron? Yes. So they're kind of mourning over the national events that they've had to deal with, and some of the things, just in trying to remember some of the stuff that has been happening. So they've been mourning about where they're at, and so they asked, as Larry pointed out, do we continue mourning because we're no longer worried about the fall of Jerusalem, we're no longer worried about all of the event? Do we keep this up? What's the answer? Yeah, why were you mourning in the first place? Because it wasn't for me, right? I mean, and what's God's perspective? Should they have been mourning? Why? For the sin. Why have they been mourning instead? For their misfortune. Okay, it's kind of like children, right? They get in trouble. They're very upset all of a sudden that they got in trouble. And we're like, no. You should be upset because of why you're in trouble, not because you're in trouble, right? And that's kind of what you have going on here with the Israelites. They're upset that they had to go through all of this national disaster, and God's saying, no, you should be upset for a very different reason. You should be upset because I was upset enough in the first place to cause the natural disaster and should have learned the lessons that were involved in that, right? And so that becomes a really important piece here in Zechariah of make sure you're understanding why you should be mourning in the first place, okay? And again, you're going to have to pull yourself out of our linear way of thinking. We just got through with chapter 6 where it's like, yay, everything's good. And now we're back in chapter 7 where things are bad again. And so we're kind of backstepping back to dealing with the problems of the people, not just visions of the future, but the present reality that they're facing. And so God goes through the task of listing some of the things that they were guilty of that they should be fasting about or mourning about or dealing with as far as sin goes. For instance, lack of justice. That was one of the things they dealt with. And we've talked about that as we've gone through the minor prophets and Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. It's been mentioned quite a bit. Give me some for instances. What are some of the ways in which they've not had justice? Okay, yeah, so if you got corrupt justice, how much justice are you going to have legally? Not very much. I mean, the judge is going to just go whichever way helps him the most, not the way that the law would say things should go. You know, you've got a lot of dishonesty in business. That's been mentioned a lot as we've gone through the prophet. You've got a lot of people holding down the poor instead of actually helping and being benevolent the way the law would demand for them to be. And that's mentioned specifically here, the idea of oppressing the widows and the orphans. Have they been doing that? Absolutely. That's one of the things that probably about half of the prophets have mentioned, that you have oppressed the orphans and you've oppressed the widows. Why do we always mention orphans and widows? Well, yeah, so why does God always mention orphans and widows? Do what? They're the vulnerable ones. You know, it's not just somebody who's down on his luck who eventually, hopefully, will be able to pull himself out of that. When you are an orphan and you have no way of making money, you have no way of earning a living, what are you going to do? You depend on the people who have the money. And the same oftentimes with widows in this culture. Dallas? Yes. Yeah. And what the last verse of James 1 say? Pure and undefiled religion is this. What is it? Okay. Keep oneself unspotted from the world and visit the orphans and widows. What does visit there mean? Care for. To be with orphans and widows. And so the idea of orphans and widows being a place of neglect, and here it's not just neglect, but they are even oppressing the orphans and widows. So it's not just we're turning a blind eye to those poor little children and those sweet older ladies. That's not the point here. What are they doing? Intentionally keeping them down. Isn't that a problem? When that's the kind of attitude you have, they have evil in their hearts. And verse 11 of Zechariah 7 says, but they refused to pay attention, and talking about their forefathers, they refused to pay attention and turned a stubborn shoulder and stopped their ears from hearing. Okay? So, has God tried to correct this along the way? Yes. Okay, and again, hopefully you've picked that up by now, because we've been in a long series of prophets in both the major and the minor prophet. We've seen it again and again and again. God sends a messenger. The messenger confronts them about their sin, and how's it go? Not well. We've had repentance, but who do we always see repenting? Do what? The prophets do, and the foreigners. It's interesting that how often you see through the prophets, the foreigners are the ones who repent. But what about the people of God? Well, they do on occasion, but as a whole, our general rule is they turn a stubborn shoulder and stop their ears from hearing. Okay, Dallas? Okay, read it. Yeah, absolutely. And so, they want to be rescued. Does God hear them? Not when they're in the midst of their sin. And so, he does go on in chapter 8 to talk about the fact that the remnant that is coming back, they will receive favor. Okay, somebody read chapter 8, 4 through 8. And this one doesn't have fancy names in it, if anybody wants to grab that real quick. So. Okay, so God, again, as we've seen repeatedly through the other prophets, God, in the midst of tragedy and punishment and despair, gives them these promises of hope. That as bad as things are, and as bad as your ancestors have been, and as bad as sin has been, I can still be your God, and I can still rescue, and I can still do the impossible for you. Because you look around at this city in disrepair, walls are down, temples not built, you've got this whole city is a disaster. How are things going for them as far as their own houses and crops? Not great. They're not producing the way they should. They're struggling to even survive. And God says, you know what? I can bring restoration to all of this, and you can have streets filled with children again, and everything can be great again. I can bring everybody home, and I can be faithful. They will be my people, and I will be their faithful and righteous God. And so there you've got this great picture of restoration again. And possibly this is dealing with, as we mentioned on Sunday, in Esther chapter 8, verse 17, it mentions people from every nation came to seek the Lord because of the way they saw the Lord. Actually it says there, because they feared the Lord. They feared the God of Israel. And so they sought to belong to that God. But I tend to personally think that this is again a glimpse of New Jerusalem. Because you really don't ever see Jerusalem restored to this degree like you do the language of New Jerusalem. And the New Jerusalem, the church and all the things that are coming because of the Messiah, that's where the hope really is. It's not found in today. For them, it was found in the future. And so God is continually having them look forward to the future so that they can see something good that's still coming. And so God kind of reveals his plan a little bit. This is where you get to in chapter 9, that there would be judgment against the nations. Why is that always part of God's spoken plan to this people? Like, have you noticed how every time he's like, things are going to be good in the future, I'm going to destroy all of those other people? Like, have you noticed that kind of the always the direction things turn? Why? Yeah, I mean, and have the Israelites ever played well with the nations around them? They still don't play well with the nations around them, right? I mean, I mean that. So this idea, this promise that part of their restoration is God also taking care of everything else. That was the only way they really had peace. Okay, as far as I'm aware, the only true time of peace that Israel ever experienced was during the time of David and Solomon, the end of David and the reign of Solomon. And what do we know about their? I mean, they kind of basically had control of all the nations around them at that point. Once they lost that with the divided kingdom, everything started falling apart again. And so God promises again, we'll take care of all those other nations, and we'll make this good. We'll give you prosperity and peace again, and that's part of it. So that's what God is promising. God is promising peace and prosperity again. And then somebody read chapter 9, verse 9. All right, so what's this make us think of? The triumphal entry, right? So if it hasn't been clear so far, maybe there is some immediate fulfillment with the physical Jerusalem and the physical nation, but what are we really looking for here in the promises God's giving to people? The Messiah. The true king who is coming, who is going to be victorious, who is going to be the righteous king, and he's identified for us. He's the one who comes in riding on a donkey, even the colt or the foal of a donkey. Okay, the colt, not the coal. The colt or the foal of a donkey, right? And we know without any doubt whatsoever that's speaking of Jesus, right? And we know that because we're told that's speaking of Jesus when we get to the New Testament. The people of Israel, when you get to the New Testament, do they believe that this king has come yet? No. They don't. Which is part of what I want us to realize as we go through the teachings here of Zechariah. The people who receive these scriptures recognize that at least partially, and I think more than partially, the promises they're given here still haven't taken place when you get to the time of Jesus. It's not until you get to Jesus that we start seeing this stuff all start to make sense, and that it all comes together, and they're realizing this is how God is doing it. Well, some of them are realizing this is how God is doing it. And so you read on verse 10 and 11. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem. The bow of war will be removed, and he will proclaim peace to the nation. His dominion will extend from sea to sea, from the Euphrates River to the ends of the earth. As for you, because of the blood of your covenant, I will release your prisoners from the waterless cisterns. You've got this promise of a king, and how expansive is the kingdom that they're promised with this king? Do what? Worldwide. Yeah, I mean, when God gave promises about his physical nation of Israel, there were boundaries placed. You remember that? That you would go this far north and this far south and this far to the sea and then this far over to the Euphrates River. And there was this kind of a boundary of what they were to expect to be the borders of their physical kingdom. And they saw that happen with who? Who was king? Solomon. That's when they see their kingdom truly expand to what God had previously promised. This kingdom, though, how far does it go? It has no limits. Like it Euphrates River to where? The ends of the earth. Not Euphrates River to the sea. Or for y'all, it's Euphrates River to the sea. Not that. It's Euphrates River all the way around to the Euphrates River. Like there's no end to it. That this kingdom is going to be worldwide. Have we been promised anything before about a kingdom that fills the whole earth? Where? Nebuchadnezzar's dream. You remember the statue with the head of gold and the arms and chest of silver, and the rock that was hewn out of the side of the hill without hands, and it rolls down and it hits the feet of the statue, and the statue falls down. What happens to the rock? It grows and fills the whole earth. This is the same kingdom. The kingdom where God's king was going to sit. This kingdom was going to be worldwide. It was going to fill the whole earth. It was going to be without borders. It was going to be absolutely beyond anything they had ever experienced. And it happened because of the blood of the covenant. Okay, does that make you think of anything? You think of something? Lord's Supper. That's a part of our covenant. Now, it also has to do with back in Exodus, where Moses is setting the people up under the Mosaic law, and they make a sacrifice, and he dips the hyssop branch in the sacrificial blood, and he sprinkles it on the people, and that was the blood of the covenant. And the book of Hebrews makes this connection for us between what Jesus did, Hebrews 9, I think, and what Moses does. But here we've got this expression again, and it's saying that this new kingdom, as for you, because of the blood of your covenant, I will release your prisoners from the waterless cisterns. Return to a stronghold, you prisoners who have hope. Today I declare that I will restore double to you. So he's saying that you are going to be released from the blood of the covenant that you had previously. Why? What are they getting in replacement of that? A new covenant. New blood of the covenant. And so we've got a king that comes who is going to have a worldwide kingdom, right? And part of this worldwide kingdom will be releasing this people from the blood of their covenant and reestablishing them under his kingdom. And we know, because of other passages, that we have a blood of the covenant associated with this king. And to keep it all in context, when did he spill that blood of the covenant? Right around the same time he rode into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. Right? It's interesting to me, as little as I understand about Zechariah, because I still go back to that. Every time I study it, I walk away going, I'm going to butcher this. But when you look at it all, you see all of these little winks toward the future. I mean, it's almost as if God's delivering this to Zechariah, and don't take this the wrong way. I don't mean this as it's going to sound, but it's like God sitting up there in heaven going, all right, watch this. Like nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I'm going to give them another little clue. Like there's all these little clues just kind of being just scattered through the text so that we can see that once we get to the end and we see how it all has played out through Jesus and we see all the connection, that we go back and reread Zechariah and we go, oh, that's what that meant. I mean, just all of these little nudges here to help us appreciate just how much God made all of this happen exactly the way he wanted it to happen. Don't you get that sense reading this? It is just mind-boggling to see how God has pulled all of these details together and said, I'm going to wrap this up for you so that you just can't deny that I made everything happen the way it happened. And you see that with Jesus. You read on, and you've got this long section here about the shepherd, this idea that God would gather them together again like sheep. Look with me down in chapter 10. Chapter 10. Somebody, if you will, read, let's go, just go ahead and do 1 through 7. 10, 1 through 7. Okay, so I tell you, this is one of the most victorious passages of Scripture you find through the whole book. It's just like, I mean, you want to read it and then like whoop for joy at the end of it. Like it's just, if you're an Israelite and this is what God's promising, you're like, yes, that's what we want. This will be awesome, because he's saying, you know what, I'm going to make all of this work. I'm going to pull all of this together. We're going to be victorious and victorious in ways that you never would have imagined. And just all of the statements here, the cornerstone, the tent peg, the battle bow, every ruler, warriors trampling down hills. I mean, you read through it and I don't know about you, but it kind of makes your heart race a little bit. You're like, this is going to be incredible. That's what God is capable of doing for a people who are willing to turn to him. Now, it gets bad again before we're done, so don't get too excited too quick. But it is interesting here. I'm going to gather these people back up because they've been without a shepherd. They've had nobody to guide them. So what's God say? I'll guide them. I'll be the one to pull all of this together. And so the cornerstone's going to come from Judah, and the tent peg will come from them. And I'm going to raise up out of Judah everything that is needed in order to bring victory, in order to bring my will, in order to make all of these things happen the way it needs to happen. And so you've got, again, several more pictures there of exactly what God is capable of doing. But they have to turn to him. They have to let him be the leader. Do they? No. And that's part of the difference. To me, as great and grand as chapter 10 sounds, you get to chapter 11 and you're like, this is depressing again. Like it turns on its head, because now you've got a picture here of shepherd, verse 4. This is 11, verse 4. Shepherd the flock intended for slaughter. Those who buy them slaughter them, but are not punished. Those who sell them say, blessed be the Lord, because I have become rich. Even their own shepherds have no compassion on them. So you've again got this picture, and here you've got kind of an object lesson. So verse 7, so I shepherded the flock intended for slaughter and oppressed the oppressed of the flock. I took 2 staffs, calling one favor and the other union, and I shepherded the flock. And so you've got this picture of things could be grand, but instead the people are destined for slaughter. They're destined, they're not a people of hope, even though they should be a people of hope. Okay? So that's part of what we, kind of the sad piece of this. Okay? And then, of course, I mentioned the part about the 2 sticks. Anybody want to explain to me what the 2 sticks are about? I can't believe you're not all so eager to explain the 2 sticks. Well, then we'll skip that. No, I'm kidding. It possibly a reference there. If you turn back to Ezekiel 37, I don't know that this is necessarily the connection. Back in Ezekiel 37, starting in verse 15, you've got this story, right after the story of the valley of dry bones and the bringing resurrection back to the nation. You've got this story told of take a single stick and write on it belonging to Judah and the Israelites associated with them. Take another stick and write on it belonging to Joseph. Join them together into a single stick. Okay, so you've got that connection there of 2 sticks being joined together into a single stick. And so people think, well, maybe that's kind of the parallel here of, joining favor and union together. I think it's a stretch just because both stories have 2 sticks in them, and we're like, oh, look, 2 sticks, and we don't know what this one means, so we'll try to make it mean the same thing this one over here means. I don't know that that's the point, because if you read on, back in Zechariah 11, you read on there starting in verse 10. Next, I took my staff called favor, and I cut it in 2, annulling the covenant that I had made with all the people. It was annulled on that day, so the oppressed of the flock who were watching me knew that it was the word of the Lord. And so here you've got this, before that, you've got the dividing up, or maybe it's after that, the dividing up of the other stick union. And so you don't have the joining together of the sticks in Zechariah. What is he doing instead? Breaking them into pieces, which is not maybe the connection should be in Ezekiel. It is the story of hope and restoration and resurrection of a nation. And what is it a picture of here? Separation, doing away with, discarding. The idea of doing away with, when we've got sticks in our yard getting ready for the burn pile, we always break them up into pieces, right? We break them up so that you can do away with them. And so that maybe the lesson is in the contrast between the 2 stories. Possibly, I don't know that you necessarily need to know about Ezekiel in order to make that conclusion about Zechariah 11, though. But it is, here you've got this concept of, kind of doing away with and being done with. There's also this statement in here, and I'm looking for it specifically, where y'all might help me find it, where he specifically says, I will break my covenant which I had made with them. 13, Lord's 10, I heard 13 for some reason. All right, I will cut it in two, annulling the covenant I have made with all the people. Okay, Dallas? Yeah. Pulling them back together. Yeah, well, and I mean, you've got the very specific prophecy, which again we'll talk about in just a moment. So here you've got but I think there's also significant in here that you've got the breaking of the covenant. Okay, you've got a people who have so identified themselves as the covenant people of God, right? And what has God repeatedly said through Zechariah? That's about to be over. We're about to be done with that. I will break my covenant with you, not meaning he is breaking his vow. I don't think that's the point. I think he is saying this covenant has now played itself out. And that's in keeping with some of the things he said earlier. You know, what did he say? I think is it Jeremiah 3 or Ezekiel 3 about divorcing the people. I will divorce the people. I will give them a certificate of divorce. Jeremiah. So Jeremiah 3, I will give the people a certificate of divorce. God's saying, you cheated on me, you cheated on me, you cheated on me, you cheated on me, so we are done. Like our agreement, our covenant is over. And I think he's re-emphasizing that here. You know, while I brought you back and I've restored you as a people in this city is not really what I'm focused on anymore. That's what we learned back in chapters 1 through 6. Okay, what I am focused on is the new Jerusalem, the new kingdom, the one that's going to fill the whole earth and be without borders, the one that is going to have the king come in on the foal of a donkey, the one who is going to, if you look here in this prophecy, chapter 11, verse 13. Somebody read 13 down through just 13 and 14. Okay, and what does that, of course, make us think of? Jesus and Judas betraying Jesus for 30 pieces of silver and realizing what was happening. And so he went back to the Jewish leaders and he tried to give the money back. And would they take it? No. So he threw it down and they used it to do what? Buy the potter's field. So you've got all of these little connections there between this prophecy and what's going to happen in the future. And again, I kind of wonder if God's not up there elbowing, I guess, Jesus next to him going, watch this. You know, we're going to put this little tidbit of information in there. Because it's just amazing to see all of these little glimpses of what's really going to happen. Because if you keep reading, verse 15, the Lord also said to me, take the equipment of the foolish shepherd. I'm about to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for those who are perishing, and he will not seek the lost or heal the broken. He will not sustain the healthy, but he will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off the hooves. Woe to the worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May a sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm wither away and his right eye go completely blind. Now, of course, that does not make you think of Jesus, but it does make you think of Jesus' teaching. Does it not? Now, Jesus is not a worthless shepherd. He is the good shepherd, right? He is not this. But didn't he allude to this when he talked about what a good shepherd he was? He talked about the hired servant or the worthless shepherd who wouldn't defend the flock, who wouldn't go and fight for them and fight off the ravenous wolves, who wouldn't do the job that a shepherd was supposed to do. And so again, you've got that same idea. God basically saying, you're going to go from bad to worse. Now, you're going to have a worthless shepherd who is going to be replaced by for lack of better terms, a violent and vicious shepherd. Okay? But he will go on and he will save them. And so again, you've got that great example of him being willing to save them no matter what their tragedy is. Look with me in chapter 12, verse 10. Then I will pour out a spirit of grace and prayer on the house of David and the residents of Jerusalem, and they will look at me whom they pierced. What does that make you think of? Okay, the cross again. I mean, is it not amazing to see how many pictures you have? And not only that, but the idea of I will pour out a spirit of grace. What does that make you think of? How many of the prophecies, like Joel 2 and others, point to the pouring out of the Spirit to the church? Because to the people who are willing, to the true house of David, those who are loyal and servants of the new king who sits on the throne of David, to those he has poured out a spirit of grace. And so again, you've got this great picture of what's coming. And so God will open a fountain for the house of David, it says. There will no longer need to be prophets in the land. At this point, any prophet after prophecy has ceased will be considered a false prophet. Well, what does that indicate for us? If you no longer need prophets, what does that mean? You've got all the word, all the message revealed, right? What did you say, Larry? Yeah, I mean, there's no longer a need to reveal God's coming plan because God has now accomplished all that he needed to accomplish. And there's no longer a need to reveal the Word of God because God has now revealed everything that needs to be revealed. That was something that would be a good thing. Okay, and so that cutting off the prophets from the land was a promise of good things to come. And when, of course, does that happen? In the new kingdom. Okay, when the kingdom, 1 Corinthians 13, when the complete has come. And so you've got that sense again of good things to come. This new covenant, it will be not even just a kingdom where there will be a righteous, eternal king who sits on the throne of David. You've got all of these promises about this coming kingdom, but the coming kingdom will be complete. Like, it will be the finishing of what God has planned. It is what God intended, and it's how God will finish all of the work that he is doing with this people. Okay, that's what's being promised here. And so this time the shepherd will be struck between the arms. I just found that to be an interesting image. I don't know that it's intended to indicate this, but the idea of the shepherd being struck between the arms, this is down, make sure I point you to the right passage here. Where is that? I really should put verse markings on my PowerPoint slide. That would help me a lot if I just put the number up there. Says it in there. It'd also help if I prepared Bible class in the same Bible I teach Bible class out of. That's also typically okay. That's probably what I'm looking for. If someone asks him, "What are these wounds on your chest?" Then he will answer, "I received the wounds in the house of my friends." Does that make you think of anything significant? Who is it that crucified Jesus? Should have been his friends, his people. Okay. Awake against my shepherd, against the man who is my associate. This is the declaration of the Lord of armies. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. That again is quoted in the New Testament. I will turn against the little ones. Verse 9, look with me here. I think this is significant. I will put this third, so he says that 2/3 will be cut off, but 1/3 will be left in it. I will put this third through the fire. I will refine them as silver is refined and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say they are my people and they will say the Lord is our God. There's a lot of New Testament allusions there. A lot. So you've got the how many times do we talk about being refined with fire and that being a part of being a Christian? The idea of calling on the name of the Lord is mentioned here. The idea of being not a people, but now are the people of God. First Peter chapter 2, verse 10. And so you've got that statement there. And that is a statement of being in a covenant. Okay, what is it? Back in Exodus, whenever God came to the people or brought the people to Mount Sinai, and he makes an agreement with them. What's he say to them? If you will be my people, I will be your God. That was covenant language. That was an agreement that they agreed to then. That is the same agreement we agree to now. That is part of being in this new covenant. And so that's what's promised to us. And so then chapter 14, which is where people really kind of go down the rabbit trail of premillennialism and all of that type of stuff, and what all is this talking about? I think it's the same thing we've dealt with multiple times as we've gone through the different prophets. You've got all of these words, these languages, these descriptions that sometimes makes us think of heaven, but I think are really indicating teachings about the church. And we've talked about that before in some of our classes. But in that day, there will be no luminaries. Okay? All of these are going to remind you of the end of the book of Revelation. There will be no luminaries. A unique day where there is neither day nor night, living waters flowing out of Jerusalem. So there's that water imagery coming out of the temple that we've talked about before in our classes. There will be a king over the whole land. Jerusalem will dwell in security. There will be no curse any longer, which is from Revelation 22, verse 3, or repeated there. A new feast of booths, which makes me think of new dwelling places. We've got new places to dwell in God's presence, and then everything, no matter how small, will be holy. That's the church. Now, we can make a parallel also to heaven. I'm not disagreeing with that. But these are also descriptions of what it means to be a part of the church. And that's why that becomes a powerful lesson here at the end. Read Malachi. We're going to try to, we might do the whole book Sunday. We might only do half of it. But go ahead and read all of